The Health Fix podcast teaches you how to take charge of your health naturally by giving you the information you need to elevate your health.
Hey, health junkies, are you tired all the time, struggling to get through the day, hair's falling out, nails are brittle, but you keep hearing from your doc that your thyroid labs are fine? Current standards for thyroid care are outdated and do not accurately assess the true physiology of the thyroid. Doctors Kelly Halderman and Eric Balkavage are on a mission to change the way we address thyroid conditions in the United States with their new book coming out this summer, The Thyroid Debacle. In this episode, I'm chatting with both docs on cellular hypothyroidism and their model to help you finally fix your thyroid versus over-medicate yourself and not get results. Okay, folks, let's jump into the podcast. It's another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause, and I have a treat for you guys today. I have Dr. Eric Balkavage on, and I also have Dr. Kelly Halderman. I almost put that all together there. And we're going to be talking about cellular hypothyroidism and the things that you need to know about your thyroid health that you might not be getting from your primary care doc or your endocrinologist for that matter. So, Dr. Eric and Dr. Kelly, welcome to The Health Fix podcast.
Thanks for having us on.
So you guys have a book coming out, and we definitely want to talk a little bit about the book. I love the title, Thyroid Debacle, because I feel like it's a debacle in my office every day when I have a patient come in and they're like, so I've been seeing my endocrinologist. I've been on levothyroxine for 20 years. I'm still overweight. I'm still tired. Nothing's happening. And I feel like my life has just been on pause for the last 2 decades. I'm sure you guys have probably heard this over and over again.
Yep, absolutely.
So in this thyroid debacle, I'm super excited because you guys are tackling it and bringing it to the forefront, because it's kind of one of these hush-hush things, because I hear it all the time in my office. Well, I went to my endocrinologist and I told them I was seeing a naturopath, and they said, oh, the naturopath, you're going to, get all of these ideas about your thyroid, but I'm the one that has your medicine. And it's like, what? Oh my goodness. So tell me this, guys, and you guys can go, whoever wants to go first. How did you get into being interested in thyroid health?
Go ahead, Eric.
I'll go. It seems like I go first on this one, but I got into thyroid physiology by accident. My background, I was a medical technologist, and so I worked in the hospital, did all the lab tests, but I wound up going off to chiropractic school and becoming a chiropractor, and I really had no intention of going back into blood chemistry at that point in time. But I had a family member who was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. She was diagnosed with fibroids and iron anemia. And so, in her late 20s, I think she was 28, they were going to do a total hysterectomy, put her on thyroid hormone medication for the rest of her life and iron. And, that was what needed to be done. And, my relative, my brother said to me, here's what's going on. You need to help her. And I'm like, I don't know anything about thyroid physiology. And he's like, well, you're going to figure it out. And, that was how I started on this process of working on thyroid physiology. And so I wound up digging into the literature and the research and finding out that what she probably had was an autoimmune condition. Her endocrinologist and I disagreed on that. And then we wanted to find a solution to addressing what was going on with the fibroids. And they were just going to, take everything out because you don't need that stuff, right? Especially if you're a guy, you don't need any of it. But to me, there had to be something else going on. There had to be some tie-in between the hypothyroidism and the iron deficiency and the fibroids. And the endocrinologist was like, nope, they're different conditions, not associated, and they all just need treatment. That's just the way life is. And so I started digging in, doing the homework, doing science and the research, and started, kind of helping her out. And in the process of learning all of this stuff about thyroid physiology from the kind of the traditional functional medicine perspective, I started talking to my patients, and in my chiropractic patients and finding out that, a large percentage of the females and significant portion of males were all diagnosed with hypothyroidism, taking thyroid meds, and they were still overweight, tired, fatigued, and not feeling great. But they had all been told that they were normal because somebody had, normalized their TSH, what we call biochemical euthyroidism, with thyroid hormone replacement therapy. And their persistent signs and symptoms were chalked up to other conditions or depression or lack of exercise or eating too much, and essentially sloth, instead of realizing that the person still had a problem, a functional problem going on. And so that led me down this process. And I too developed hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, in my journey as I was taking care of people, and I was doing all what I thought were all the right things. So I was really kind of perplexed when I got my labs back. I'm insulin resistant. I'm putting on belly fat, and my thyroid antibodies are elevated, and I'm like, what the heck? It shouldn't be me. I shouldn't be the person who has Hashimoto's because I do the right things. But when I took a step back and looked at my life a little bit, I realized that some of the stuff that I was doing was creating my condition. I was overtraining, undersleeping, poor breathing. I had a good diet. I was exercising, but I had a lot of other stressors going on. And that was the things that were creating this hypothyroid state. And that led me to kind of take another look at what really does cause hypothyroidism, what was the trigger, and when does this whole process really start to occur. And that's where we kind of get into this whole concept that hypothyroidism doesn't really start at the thyroid gland. It actually starts in the hypothyroid, or starts in the cells, usually months or years, even decades before the thyroid gland becomes dysfunctional.
Oh, absolutely. Your story sounds similar to mine in terms of overtraining. I basically tell my patients I overtrained myself into hypothyroidism, just beat myself up, and mentally and physically. It's a common story. And yeah, I love that you guys are mentioning on a cellular level, things start so much more ahead of time. So thanks for sharing, Dr. Eric. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Kelly, you're up. Tell us how you got into this game.
Sure. So when I was in my late 20s, I was practicing a full-on family practice, allopathic medicine, and was really good at it. I could match, the symptoms and come up with a diagnosis and write out a prescription, and did really well at it. And it all changed when I started to get symptoms myself. I started to get sick. I had migraines out of nowhere and just neurological issues out of nowhere. And I was eventually diagnosed with MS, and I was given some pills. I was written a prescription and a pat on the back because I had a dismal death sentence just handed to me. And I had 2 young children at the time. And I thought, hell to the no. I'm not, for lack of a better term, I'm not going to take these medications and, slowly, concede to this diagnosis when really I didn't care before, or I wasn't taught, rather, I would say. I wasn't taught to look for root causes. I was just told, this is a thyroid condition. This is the Synthroid that we prescribe. This is the, the diabetes, here are the medications we prescribe. But when the tables were turned and I was the actual patient, I wanted answers. I wanted to know, why did my body start to attack my myelin sheath? What was going on? So I had to go back and get a medical doctorate in naturopathic medicine. And I started to use these things that I totally, poo-pooed years before, such as nutrition and detoxification. And lo and behold, when I did employ those things and I put rubber to the road and I started to work on those things, I became 110% better than I'd ever become, at all. So, I made a full recovery along the way. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So that's where, I'm in this game, guys. Like this is my life too. I don't just write about it. I live in this body that needs to be taken care of because my thyroid was impacted when I was struggling. And to this day, I'm doing things, and we're going to get into talking about, why we wrote this book and who we're trying to help, because we need to look at this multifactorial. It's never just one thing. And that's what I loved about your practice, Janine, and about naturopathy, is that we're not looking for, the one pill to get over things or the one vaccine to take care of things. It's looking at our whole life. It's looking at the epigenetic factors, the lifestyle factors, and that's what we do a really good job of in this book in part 3. It's a manual of how to get better. It's a manual of how to look at everything that you're dealing with, the stress, the allopathic load, we call it, on the body, and start to pick away at all of it in a really methodical fashion.
I love that. I love that approach, taking everything and looking. That's how I was taught, but it's also how I think. And I think once you've been through, even the chiropractic training that you've had, Dr. Eric, I mean, we think in such a well-rounded term, and a lot of patients are looking for that now. And folks who are really frustrated. And of course, I want to do this podcast specifically to inspire someone who's out there that might be really frustrated with not feeling better, with just fatigue that's insurmountable, moods, whatever it may be. So in terms of cellular hypothyroidism, let's talk about what that means, just so folks kind of get a sense, because most people have heard of hypothyroidism, but not cellular hypothyroidism.
Yeah, so when we talk about the signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism, they are caused by a reduced amount of T3, which is the active hormone, reaching the receptors inside the cell. And you could have reduced levels of thyroid hormone, primarily T3, reaching the receptors of the cells as a result of things that happen away from the gland. So you could have hypothyroid signs and symptoms. You could have decreased T3 reaching those receptors while there's still normal levels of T4 and T3 in the blood, while TSH is normal, with a perfectly healthy gland. The body has there's two regulating processes when we think about thyroid physiology. You have the thyroid gland, which dumps out thyroid hormone in mass doses, right? And then we always have a circulating reservoir or reserve of thyroid hormone, that's the T4 and T3 that's circulating. But the individual cells and tissues have the ability to self-regulate thyroid hormone based on their need and their metabolism, okay? If the cells and tissues didn't have that ability, then when thyroid hormone is increased, it would be increased in every cell, in every tissue, all at the same time. You wouldn't be able to have control of your gut at one point in time and control of your adrenal glands being different, right? That means if your fight or flight system was kicked up, you'd have to poop your pants because everything would speed up all at the same time, right? That means you couldn't have your tissues healing at night, having increased metabolism and stay asleep because everything would have to be upregulated at the same time. So there's this silly notion that the amount of thyroid hormone that's dumped into the blood determines how fast each cell and tissue regulates. Like all the individual cells and tissues don't self-regulate. That idea is somehow lost. We all learned it in school, but somehow then when we get out in clinical practice, we forget that the cells can self-regulate. So cellular hypothyroidism is the lack or the reduced amount of T3 that's binding to the receptors inside the nucleus and the mitochondria of the cells and driving what we call normal genomic effects, normal what we call metabolism of the cell. And our perception is that this isn't a mistake of the physiology, but an adaptive response to some level of excessive stress. And this happens long before your thyroid gland becomes dysfunctional.
It makes perfect sense. I think a lot in terms of circulation. I think a lot in terms of our signaling mechanisms between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and how that can impact each and every cell. What you mentioned about a systemic wide, we think we take the medication and everything's going to upregulate. It's a common misconception with patients. I don't know how many patients are like hoping that their TSH is off so that they can get medication. And then they're like, yes, I'm going to lose weight because I'm going to take Synthroid. I'm like, no, Doesn't work that way. But it's one of those things that I see very commonly. Do you see that, Kelly, as well? I see you nodding over there. It's crazy. But I think a lot of people don't realize that beyond the thyroid that sits here, that every single cell responds to thyroid hormone. I think it's a very unique concept unless someone has dove in to T3 and some of the protocols of taking T3. So let's chat a little bit about T3. And so for those of you who are listening, maybe your doctor did give you Cytomel or liothyronine at some point. That is T3. You might have also heard that T3 is scary and it's bad. And oh my gosh, I can't believe your doctor put you on that. They're going to kill you. That is also some things that I've heard. You guys heard that one out there?
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion on using some of the protocols like the Wilson's protocol or the CT3M, I can never say that one right, using just straight T3 and adjusting towards needing certain amounts of T3 depending on the day? Would that be something that would fit to the cellular hypothyroidism model, or is it a different thought?
I would say initially it's a different thought. Okay. And so if you take this concept that what we have first is some type of deactivation of thyroid hormone at the cellular level, then there's inflammatory mechanisms or other physiologic triggers that are causing T4 to be deactivated to reverse T3. Okay. And so the initial thought process is that if I'm converting T4 to reverse T3 is binding to the T3 receptor and blocking T3 function. So if I switch from T4 to T3, then I can't have reverse T3 blocking the receptor, and I can get more T3 to the receptor. Couple issues or problems with that thought process. The first is that reverse T3 does not block the nuclear T3 receptor or the mitochondrial receptor. So that's the first one. Where the conversion of T4 to reverse T3 occurs is at the plasma membrane or outside the cell. So it's either occurring via exosomes releasing thyroid hormone or deiodinase enzymes to do the deactivation, or it's causing right at the plasma membrane and the reverse T3 is exited out. I haven't found one clinical research paper that says that reverse T3 blocks T3 receptors. Now, reverse T3 can block receptors that bind T4 and T3 on the plasma membrane. Those are called integrin receptors. Okay. But those drive non-genomic actions, not the typical genomic actions. Okay? So, and reverse T3 does play an important role there in preventing the replication of sick cells. So one of the concerns, and Kelly and I talk about this in the book, that if you flood the body with T4 and the body is trying to deactivate thyroid hormone and you just keep dumping more in, T4 can bind to the integrin receptors on the outside of the cell and cause cell replication. And you would say, well, what's the big deal? Well, if you have a bunch of sick cells and you replicate those sick cells, what do we call that? We call that disease or cancer, right? And so there are some papers and there was one that just came out at the end of 2019, and I told Kelly, nobody will ever do this paper or this research because it's too scary of a concept. But the paper shows that hypothyroidism is protective against many forms of cancers, and that people who are diagnosed hypothyroid, put on T4 medication, have a higher prevalence of developing almost every type of cancer.
Wow.
So you think about that. Why is hypothyroidism this mistake by the physiology, or is the hypothyroidism a protective response of the cells and the tissues and the immune system to say, hey, we've got a problem here, and what we don't want is bacteria replicating, viruses replicating, or sick cells replicating, so we're going to slow metabolism down. Reverse T3 plays an important role in that process. The other part of that is that if you just flood the body with T3, it does you need less energy to transport T3 into a cell. So you can get more T3 in there. There are some cells that need T3 because some tissues cannot make or convert T4 to T3. So they have to have some T3. So defending T3 is a biologic priority. So the body does defend the blood levels of T3. So they can be helpful. The problem is that if those same mechanisms of deactivation are going on due to some type of perceived cellular stress, then what's going to happen is, just like the T4 was deactivated to reverse T3, the T3 can be deactivated to one of 4 forms of T2.
Wow.
Only one of those forms of T4 or of T2 is really functional. And the nice part about it is when your body deactivates T4 and T3 during that cell stress response, one of the versions of T2 will support as like a backup battery metabolism and mitochondrial function. So it acts as a kind of the backup, like the generator. So you can't run the whole system efficiently, but you can still generate some of the processes. The third problem is that when we have excessive cell stress going on, what happens is the central system regulates differently from the peripheral system. So the hypothalamus is what drives the production of TRH, thyrotrophin releasing hormone, which then drives the pituitary production of TSH. Normally, the level of TRH is in relationship to the amount of the amount of thyroid hormone that's in the blood, T4, T3. But under stress conditions, the hypothalamus regulation is upregulated. There's increased conversion of T4 to T3 at the hypothalamus, which then causes a decreased production of TSH and it suppresses T4, T3 production. So if you have cellular hypothyroidism, you've got this deactivation process going on in the peripheral tissues, and you flood the system with T4, the brain, the hypothalamus will normalize very quickly. It's 10-fold more sensitive to thyroid hormone than the peripheral tissues based on the type of thyroid hormone receptor. So once you flood the hypothalamus, okay, now there are signals sent to the body to deactivate or ubiquinate something called deiodinase 2. Deiodinase 2 is the enzyme that converts T4 to T3. So when you flood the brain and you have this separate regulating system going on, essentially you're flooding the brain with thyroid hormone. The brain is sending signals to the body saying, hey, I'm flooded. You don't need to keep converting that thyroid hormone. And now your body starts to deactivate it. So you get upregulation of the brain, more anxiousness, more anxiety, more sleeplessness, and yet your peripheral tissues have become downregulated. You continue to store belly fat. You're still tired. You're still fatigued. So this is where your patient who gets put on T4 replacement therapy, any type of replacement therapy, has that initial, hey, I feel better because now there's something into the system. Because remember, by the time your patient gets diagnosed as hypothyroid and their TSH is above lab range, they've lost 90% of the function of their thyroid gland. 90% is gone.
Wow.
And so when they get any, they're going to feel better. But that honeymoon period is going to go away because the peripheral tissues are still deactivating it. And this is why your patient says, my TSH is now 0.001, but I'm still tired, still fatigued. Their doctor's saying it can't be because there's so much in the brain or in the body. The brain is saturated, but as soon as the brain is saturated, fight or flight mechanisms go up and peripheral conversion goes down. It's the same thing your body would do in a hyperthyroid state. Okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to overwhelm that conversation. I get carried away.
That was great.
No, it was good. I was flowing. I'm like, all right, I'm taking notes like really fast here because it gives me some words that I don't have to explain to people why they suppress. So why they get suppression and they're like, I don't feel any better. I want more meds. Doc, give me more meds. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we're not in the right path. I'm always
If you think about it this way, if the issue was just the gland, right, and all the peripheral mechanisms worked appropriately, then you put more thyroid hormone into the system and everything gets better, right? Everything works because it was just a deficiency. But if the problem started in the periphery then initiated the immune attack, and then there was gland destruction, and you're coming in at the end and you're just dumping it in, it doesn't fix all the stuff that happened first. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like you're putting a Band-Aid on, and the Band-Aid isn't really stopping the problem.
Right. If you filled up a bucket of water that has holes in it, right, you would be like, it keeps leaking. Yep, but it's full right now. See ya. But by the time I get out of your office, the bucket's got no water in it. Well, it has to have water in it. Here, just take another one, pour it in there. Don't spill it on your way out. I didn't spill it. Yes, you did, because there was water in there when you left my office, right? We have to look at what's going on. Nobody's looking at the bucket to see if there's holes in it, right? The patient is, the doctor's not.
No. The patient knows there's multiple holes. They're just like, what, grasping. Like, I need something. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and that's where our book comes in. I mean, that's where we're giving you the, part one is the old model and understanding how I was taught in medical school and why your doctor may just not understand this. I mean, it was very simple in medical school. Here's the thyroid physiology. When the TSH is high, it meets this criteria, and T4 is low, then give them the medication. And so we go over that part in part one so you can understand where your doctor is coming from. If they're a traditional allopathic doctor and endocrinologist, they're doing their best. I have friends and colleagues, and so does Dr. Eric, that they're doing their best. So in chapter 2, Eric goes deep into this awesome science that blows everybody's minds, and and really explains it well, and really does a really good job of explaining it on a lay person's terms as well, right? So lays it out, and then also uses these beautiful analogies so that not only can the reader who has suffering, who might not have MD after their name or anything after their name, but they know they're suffering, they can understand it. Like you said, Dr. Janine, that you give them vocabulary and metaphors to understand, and then, like the bucket, and then you can hand it to your doctor too, and the doctor can get this education that they've been working on for 10 plus years, all the PubMed information and clinical studies and everything. I mean, everything in part 2 is all from the science. It's all from the science. And that's where it drives me batty, in that a study out of the New England Journal of Medicine says it takes 17 years for this good clinical data to be launched into your doctor's office in their hands to help you. We're not going to wait around that long. We're not going to wait 17 years to implement in this really great findings and understanding, and that's what our book does. It's just lightning years ahead. And in that part 2, it just goes deep into the science, and then we play on out with part 3, where it's the solutions. It's how we talk about why, increasing the dose and manipulating numbers is not the way to go. We really want to take a multifactorial approach. And what we do with that is we go through what we call fitness factors. So the thyroid, the strategic thyroid program strategy to really get your body healed and whole, goes through optimizing epigenetic factors, lifestyle factors. How's your diet, your dietary fitness, your physical fitness, of course, but these fitness factors go into even emotional fitness. We know that when our patient, even if they have the best diet, they're taking the right supplementation based on their needs, they're working out, they're great, but if they are in a stressful, abusive relationship, or if there's something emotionally weighing them down, that can sabotage their health just as much as anything else can that's physiological. So, to take a tangent, but I'm like, that's what our book is here to do and deliver on is that.
No, that's huge. That's what we need. My audio is doing something weird. Are you guys okay on your end?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Just got a little echo feedback here, so I will edit that out. Also, one quick side note right at the moment, I was panicking for a second here. My thing is trying to say that I need to upgrade to my stuff in 5 minutes. So I was trying to quick upgrade and it wasn't working for me. So we might have to cut off and then start again if you're okay with that. To keep going, just heads up. So I think that there's a lot of folks out there that are going to love your guys' book because of the explanation that they can take to their doctor, and hopefully the doctors will be receptive to this information. Now, in terms of looking at cellular hypothyroidism and things that folks can do to try to help their cells, because I feel like at this point, sometimes I don't even want to put folks on medication I myself am not on medication because I was trying to work on different ways to get my cells healthy. So what would you be advising in terms of some steps folks could take to work on improving their cellular metabolism and their cellular thyroid function, if you will?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important to both of us is that have people understand that you rarely fix the thyroid physiology problem by adding more thyroid hormone to a system that's trying to get rid of it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So there is a point when you've lost 90% of the function of your gland where you probably have to have some level of support, whether it's T4, T3, some T3, or a glandular. And, Kelly works with a company that makes a fantastic glandular product that can be used. It's called Hypothyroid. But ultimately, we don't fix the thyroid physiology problem by putting more stuff in. Okay, because if you understand and can wrap your mind around the process that the body is deactivating thyroid hormone on purpose, then putting more in makes the system have to work harder to get rid of it. And if you kind of jive with what I said about how thyroid hormone can have non-genomic actions on the outside of the cell that we may not want, maybe it's not a great idea to flood the system. So that being said, we then need to consider, okay, what can we do to help them? And really it comes down to a couple key pieces. One, we need to identify what the stressors are that are creating this excessive cell stress. And people might say, well, I'm not going to get rid of all the stress. It's impossible. We're not asking somebody to get rid of all the stress in your life. Matter of fact, it's impossible to get rid of all the stress in your life, and it's unhealthy to get rid of all the stress in your life. Stress can be good. It's what makes you stronger. The reason you go for a long run or you work out is to break you down a little bit, to push you a little bit, and then you get stronger from that training, right? Everything is the same. So you need some stress. It's hormetic. Too little is not healthy. Too much is not healthy. So you need to have some. But what we want to do is find the stressors that are really creating the problem, reduce them or remove them as much as possible. Then we need to take a look at the systems that have become compromised and support not only the things that are creating the stress, reduce them and remove them, but actually support those tissues and organ systems that have become compromised, help them heal and repair. Because one of the things that happens is when we have excessive cell stress, we shift from a homeostatic regulating system to an allostatic regulating system, which means some processes in the bodies get downregulated while other processes get upregulated. And so for the listeners, the way I like to explain it is, everything was great, you were cooking for your family, everybody was piled around the kitchen, and you were just having a grand old time, that would be homeostasis, right? But if somebody broke into your home and started attacking your family, what would you do? Would you continue to cook? Would you continue to fold the laundry? Or would you let that stuff burn and put all your focus and attention into protecting your family and surviving? I think most of us say we go into survival mode. Your cells and tissues do the same thing. So when you're in that survival mode for an extended period of time, we start to see other systems become compromised. We see adrenal physiology start to become compromised. We see GI tract physiology start to become compromised. We see blood sugar regulation, hormone, neurotransmitters. All these systems start to become compromised by extended stress conditions. We consider that they're all different unassociated conditions, especially in allopathic medicine. You have adrenal fatigue, you have insulin resistance, and in reality, what they have is an adaptive response to this excessive cellular stress. Kelly and I call it multi-system adaptive disorder. So when the patient says, what's wrong with me? Do I have a thyroid condition? Do I have adrenal fatigue? Do I have leaky gut? What you have is you have a multi-system adaptive process. You don't have all these things going wrong separately. They're all part of the adaptive.
Okay. So all of those things put together, we can't look at it as just, you've got just hypothyroidism, or you have just insulin resistance, or you have just adrenal fatigue. It's all a big kind of process. We want to think about everything together, correct?
Yeah, it's a web of dysfunction. I mean, that's the best way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have this physiologic web of adaptation that becomes a physiologic web of dysfunction in time.
Makes
And
perfect sense.
this simplistic idea that we'll put one, that we can measure it all with one lab, TSH, and that we can fix it all with just one hormone is ludicrous. It's a debacle.
And that's why we'll have, you survey your patients, and that's what they're telling us. That's what they're coming, they're still suffering. I'm doing everything my endocrinologist said. I'm doing everything, my medical doctor said, and I just don't feel any better. My symptoms are the same. And that's what we're hearing. I mean, the statistics don't lie. I mean, there's studies that say that we're not doing a good job at allopathic medicine, at managing hypothyroidism, and we're not.
And that's the big debate in allopathic medicine is, at what point do we give thyroid hormone medication? We should give it when somebody's subclinical because the patient's struggling and they're not feeling well. So let's give it when they're subclinical. Well, maybe we should give it when they're at 4 or when they're at 6 or when they're at 10. Maybe it needs to be T4, T3 combo. Maybe it needs to be T3 first through the day. I don't think any of those really matter if you don't get to the root issue, which is there's some type of cell danger response that's telling your body, A, deactivate thyroid hormone locally, slow down cellular metabolism, ramp up the inflammatory process. And if we don't deal with deal with that in a short period of time, then what happens is the next phase of hypothyroidism kicks in. And we talk about this in the book. It's the hypothyroid spectrum. So it starts as cellular hypothyroidism. And then the cells start releasing more inflammatory cytokines to signal the other cells that say, hey, we got trouble over here. You better get yourself ready because it's coming. And 2, then they start to release these things called DAMPs and PAMPs, which are damage-associated molecular proteins and pathogen-associated molecular proteins. So what happens is these damaged cells start spitting out portions of their DNA to tell the immune system that, hey, we're damaged. You got to come help us and clean us up. Or if it's a PAMP, this is the piece of the organism that's causing the problem. Come get this thing. And what's interesting is we talk about thyroid autoimmunity and Hashimoto's and thyroiditis as this mistake of the immune system. And really, if you think about it, the thyroid cells have receptors. There's these damaged receptors that they can bind the DAMPs and the PAMPs. And when the PAMPs and DAMPs bind to these receptors, that can trigger the thyroid cell in itself to start acting like an immune cell. It actually starts increasing inflammation on its own. It doesn't even need the immune system to start self-destruction. It starts to release pieces of thyroid tissue, DAMPs and PAMPs, to send it out into the bloodstream to signal the lymphocytes and essentially invite the lymphocytes into the thyroid gland to help with the destruction process. And you might say, well, why would the body do that? Is it molecular mimicry? Is it one of the other 9 or 10 mechanisms that we associate with autoimmunity? All of those mechanisms are essentially screw-ups of the immune system. And while they may occur, definitely, especially the more ramped up this gets, is it really always a defect in the immune system, or is it a properly planned process? If you had to deactivate thyroid hormone in a couple million cells, maybe you do it locally in the tissue if that's the only thing that's impacted. But if it's chronic and persistent, what's the best way to turn down the metabolism? Shut the gland off. I mean, what do we see in areas of starvation? These people can have higher levels of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. Why? There's no food, right? So if you're starving, do you need high metabolism? So we see in some of the literature in those countries where there's famine, where there's starvation, there is higher levels of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. In one study, they showed that when they actually went in and tried to fix it with thyroid hormone or in iodine by loading the body with more iodine, the people got worse. Now, why would they get worse? Because they don't have the nutrition. So if you don't have it, you want to slow the metabolism down. So you go from cellular hypothyroidism. If it becomes extended, now you get the attack on the gland. That's phase 2. And then phase 3 is gland exhaustion. And that's when your allopathic physician's coming in and saying, okay, TSH is finally high. T4 is finally low. Now these symptoms are due to hypothyroidism. They weren't before, but now they are. And now we're going to fix it all, but we're just going to give you more thyroid hormone. And if you look at it from a very narrow, simplistic view, that it all started when the thyroid gland stopped making thyroid hormone, then you might say, oh, then the solution is to give it. The gland just became dysfunctional. It just happens in 10 to 15% of the population. The glands just go wonky, right? But then we wouldn't have papers coming out saying, why are our thyroid patients so unhappy? You wouldn't have the allopathic physicians arguing over what type of thyroid hormone to give. Is it T4 better, T4, T3, T3 only? The argument is they're all arguing over the wrong point. It really doesn't matter if you have this persistent cellular stress, because your body's going to deactivate T3 just like it deactivates T4. Sorry.
No, that's excellent. So, I mean, I'm just taking notes here because I'm like, all right, we got to write all this in my podcast notes. Because I get asked so many times, I mean, what med are you going to, put me on? Or naturopaths are known for doing the T3 only protocols or doing a little more armor than the Levo. And back when Nature Thyroid was available or compounded versions were available, I mean, we're kind of known for being kind of in the wild west of these meds. And I got to be honest, I'm sick of trying to play with the meds because I've noticed, much like you guys, that it doesn't work. And obviously, I admitted on this podcast that I have hypothyroidism, and I didn't even treat myself with medication because I was like, it doesn't do anything. I almost feel like sometimes when I'm giving people some of the meds, that it's just kind of mentally that they're like, okay, I'm treating this. I'm doing something about it. But I'm equally frustrated, as many practitioners are, that we're not getting to the bottom of it with the meds. The meds aren't the secret. There's something else. And what you're saying here with the starvation component, I'm going, okay, so now we've got some gut stuff. We've got a lot of overfed, undernourished folks who are essentially starving. So what's your guys' take, or what are you talking about in the book in terms of nutrition and going down that route? I'm guessing it's not all about being gluten-free and dairy-free.
No, so, there's a million different diets, and, you can squabble back and forth, and the carnivores can argue with the vegans, and, the go paleo, and it's all kind of gibberish, because when it gets down to it, we are pro whole foods. We are pro taking that approach, whether you're starting from a really, really highly processed diet, or you're on one of these other diets. The more whole, unprocessed foods we can get in our diet, the more we can promote our health. So that's really where we stand in terms of, we don't have allegiance to any one sort of diet, because just quite frankly, one diet doesn't work for everybody. I mean, I was a vegan when I got really sick, and I've gone through every single diet, and you just gotta try it on, see how it fits, see if it was working for you, but make sure that you're eating real food. Right? I mean, that is step one, that you're not introducing things into your body that may set off this cell danger response. Like, what the hell is that? It's not even, just looking at kind of like my kids' school lunches when they used to go to school, back in the day when they used to go to school, and I'm like, how are we doing this to our children? If we just took the approach of food that's not manipulated, and just start there, and organic when you can. We like to direct people to Environmental Working Group, because they have great resources on organic versus non, the dirty dozen. They've just reformulated that. And then also just to take a look at the products that we're using. So that's a kind of different tangent, but one of our fitness factors is environmental fitness. So what are you slathering on your body every day and putting in your air? You got Febreze, plugged into your walls and all, right? So, people are like, well, I don't get it. Like, how is that a part of my problem? And it's like, well, Ann Louise Gelman, Dr. Gelman has written a whole book on why toxins make you fat, and it's probably, it's just adding to the allostatic load that we talk about. So, but yeah, that answers that question about diet. We really want people to just start there.
No, I love it. I love it. Because when I start thinking about this and what everyone's heard kind of social media, if you have Hashimoto's, you can never have gluten again. And, in some cases I'm like, well, what kind of gluten are we talking about here? But, if it's something that's frankenfood, as I often say on my podcast, then obviously this is one of the big things. I think another big thing, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on this, is we've got a lot of people now who have kind of fallen into the red wine phase and of life. And really, we've got people saying wine's great for you. We have, all these different departments. And so I tend to think about cell danger response and alcohol. And I also think about it in terms of edibles, because now I live in Washington State and I've lived in Colorado. Don't know what that says about me, but nevertheless, the edible component is a big deal for a lot of people now. If they're not drinking, they're doing some edibles to relax. And I've looked at the ingredients on a lot of edibles, and the candies are junk. So any statements in terms of what alcohol does to upregulate the cell danger response?
Yeah, I think, whether it's alcohol or drugs, whether prescription or recreational, they're still toxins, right? And I think the most important issue, I think, is especially if you're in a state of chronic health problem, poor health, you got all this stuff going on, as much as you can clean up your diet and your lifestyle is gonna go a long way to getting healthy. But when it comes like the individual things, so are you saying, hey, you can't have alcohol, you can't do this edible? The way I like to look at life is from like an 80-20 perspective, okay? And I like to break things down into habits and behaviors. One of those things that's really important is that people understand the difference between a habit and a behavior. If you have a habit of drinking wine, you're drinking wine, a couple glasses of wine every night. That's a habit. It's probably going to be part of your problem. You're consuming alcohol on a regular basis, plus all the other stress. It's just another piece to that stress load that's going to help break you down. But if your behavior is to drink wine, which means you do it periodically, is it an unhealthy behavior? Probably. But is it going to destroy your health? Probably not, right? So one of the things that is pretty universal statement to say is that not almost everybody who's healthy has a lot of healthy habits, right? Mm-hmm. And anybody who's really struggling with chronic health problems probably doesn't have a lot of healthy habits. They may have some healthy behaviors, but they don't have healthy habits. And the difference is somebody says, well, I'm healthy because I exercise. How often do you exercise? Like once a week. That's a habit. I mean, that's a behavior. That's not a habit. A habit is you get up every day, whether you like it or not, and you exercise. That's a habit, okay? Some days it's hard. Some days you don't want to do it, but you just do it. You have the discipline. It's part of who you are. It's a habit. And then if you say, well, I eat healthy. Well, you may eat some healthy foods. That's a behavior, but look at the week or 2 weeks. What are you eating over the bigger period of time? Oh, then you don't have a habit of eating healthy. You have a behavior of eating healthy, but your habit is to eat poorly. And that's what we want to change. Healthy people have more healthy habits. And as Kelly and I say in the book, their level of fitness when it comes to their dietary health is higher. They have a higher level of fitness. And with everything, if you have a higher level of fitness, you can get away with a little bit more, right? But if you're starting with very poor fitness and now you add more poor behaviors or unhealthy habits, it's really going to be problematic.
Makes perfect sense. I'm glad you're talking about the 80-20 kind of plan, because I think a lot of people get into a very restrictive thought process and then can't stick with it because they have that mindset of restriction. Now, I'd love to talk about mindset in all of this, because I'm gathering that that's probably part of one of your fitness factors in this case. Mm-hmm. Who wants to talk about mindset?
So I think mindset falls in a couple categories, and one of the things we wrote about is emotional fitness. And again, like we said, you can have the best diet, the best everything, extraneous, but if your emotional well-being, if your spiritual well-being, if your mindset is off, it's really going to, again, sabotage your health. So that's such a cornerstone of any health protocol, is that you get your mind right, you get your goals set, you work with a coach, you work with a practitioner if you have to, you find the right fit for you, and you find things that are actually within your set of being. Like right now, we're living in a little bit different time right now. So you don't want to take on train for a marathon when you have 3 kids at home and you've suddenly become a homeschool mom. Just like you can't do things outside of what you can actually do. So I would, say keeping that mindset strong. And, I like to have patients do mantras, write down journaling, really get into, what their goals are. And again, you have to define your goals, and then you create habits to get there. It's because people stand in front of me and, they complain about this and that and other things, and they don't quite understand that, we really have to change what's going on up here. Supratentorial, we have to have a shift in what's going on. And our book does walk through some of the things like that we've employed over the years of doing this in ourselves. And it's a daily thing, just like I said, it's that I wake up in the morning and I'm not like, well, I'm glad I got over Lyme disease and I'm glad I got over that. It's like, no, every day. I bet the 3 of us think this way. It's like, what do we got to do today to continue to be healthy, to continue so that we stay, the physically fit, mentally fit? What do we have to do? And if we don't do those things, we're not going to be healthy, right? So you make those choices and you stay on track and you make them within your wheelhouse of what you can do.
I love that.
I think one of the things that's really important too, from a listener perspective, is we don't realize that the person we talk to most in our daily lives is ourselves, right? We think we talk to everybody else, but really, it's really important that you understand the conversation going on in your head, in the 6 inches between your ears, right? And whatever that conversation is that's perseverating in the background of your brain all day, all the time, can create a danger response in the body. And your cells don't necessarily know the difference between a danger that's produced by a toxin, a danger that's produced by an organism, a danger that's produced by hypoxia, or a danger that's produced by your mind. And so it becomes really, really important that you understand that controlling how you think, how you respond, how you feel about things is critically important to your well-being. I love Stoicism. And so I think the concepts of Marcus Aurelius and modern day Stoics like Ryan Holiday, who talk about these things, is really, really important ways to think. It's funny. I put a post on the other day, I think was something like, failure is making irrational decisions based on an emotional mind, right? And it is when we allow our emotional self to take over, we often make poor decisions, right? We make poor food choices, poor life choices, poor habits, and all those things. And we can easily if we use a logical mind, right, not an emotional mind, we have a tendency to make better decisions, right? More rational decisions. I'll give you a great example. I was running yesterday. And I was probably 5 miles or so into my run, and I'm running on a path, and there's people up ahead of me, and I'm yelling to them, hey, I'm coming up. And it's on a narrow area where I couldn't get off, right? And so when I came up on them, the woman yelled at me for running and not telling her and giving her 30 feet of berth. And then her husband started yelling at me and flipping the finger. Now, had I been in a different state of mind, right, I may have taken things differently. But I thought about that for a second. And I thought, man, how sad are these people to react and behave that way? And instead of using my emotional mind, which was the first instinct, and having a confrontation, I just use my logical mind that they're not mad at me. They're in fear. They're having those things. And, you let it go. Now, I don't know if they let it go, but I let it go. It's nothing I can deal with right now. It's nothing I can fix right now. It's their fear. It's their misinterpreted emotional state. And things like that, just that experience, it can be the things that really can cause your health to become really diminished. I mean, and if that's just one episode, what if you have those same things happening because of work relationships and kids and your personal relationship with your partner, your spouse? I mean, you start to add all that noise up and how you perceive it. The thing that you may be thinking is getting you isn't the virus. It's not the bacteria, but maybe the emotional stress that you're creating with your own self-talk, thoughts, and emotions. And maybe that virus would have stayed dormant had you not created the cell stress with your terrible stinking thinking and changed your thought process. And for most of us that get healthy and get well, one of those things you realize is those people who seem to be the healthiest are really some of the more peaceful, calm, and rational people. And as we start to see people get sicker, you start to see them become more emotional, more irrational. And it's not their fault. It's just what happens, but we have to regain control of that, and it can be done.
That's a huge thing that I'd love to hear, because I think that's one of the big things in my office that I work with patients is trying to get the mindset turned around, because I think that's one of the things that takes you down so fast. And probably when I look at my situation, one of the things that took me down real fast in the time frame in which things kind of developed for me. It's huge. Now, sleep's another biggie, and I'm sure that's in one of your factors as well. Who wants to talk about sleep a little bit?
Yeah. So go ahead, Kelly.
So I mean, sleep. The sleep deprivation is a pandemic itself, or an epidemic rather. Stephen, Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep is one of the books that we found a lot of information. It's just an excellent book. He's a phenomenal researcher on sleep. It goes through the importance of sleep, how it's connected to everything from insulin resistance, weight gain, mood disorders, of course, and how we are I think we're just not getting it, how important it is. And we're just not really, it's one of those things, it's just because it's a small thing, just doesn't mean it's not important, right? Just like air and water. Very, very, very important to stay hydrated, but your patient's like, I'm hydrated, right? It's just like sleep. It's like, well, how'd you sleep last night? And it's like, I don't know, and then you really dig in and it's like they were up 5 times. They were on their phone until 1 a.m. So sleep hygiene is something I'm sure that you cover that head to toe in your clinic, and we do too. It's one of the foundations of health. Nothing trumps hydration and rest in peace and good nutrition, right? So in that chapter, you'll find how to track your sleep. Like we're big on tracking sleep, because then I wear an Oura ring, so I know how much deep sleep did I get, how much REM did I get. So you'll have an idea if you do an intervention. Let's say you start to take some melatonin or some GABA. You'll have an idea of how your body's responding. Because guessing is just really hard. People are not very good reporters when it comes to that. So we offer some of that, and then we go through all the sleep hygiene things. We'll have a checklist on there, like blue lights, and not a lot of stimulation. Get a dark room, a colder room, all the things in the science. We've really summarized a lot of information that's out there.
Wow. Your guys' book, The Thyroid Debacle, sounds like it is very comprehensive. I'm looking forward to it coming out. Now, is there anything that I didn't ask you guys about that you really want to talk about related to cellular hypothyroidism or your book, or anything that we can share with the audience that I haven't asked you about?
I think it's been a great interview. I think the most important thing for a person to be aware of is that if you don't feel well, right, you got to keep asking questions. There's a reason you don't feel well. And I think what happens many times is, especially in today's world, we run limited lab panels. We don't do a lot of investigation for dysfunction. Most of the testing that your doctors are doing revolve around disease. And if you can have dysfunction long before you have a disease. You have cellular hypothyroidism often before you have a glandular hypothyroid condition. You have cardiovascular disease developing long before you have a heart attack. You have blood sugar dysregulation long before you develop diabetes. Poor health and disease and illness is a process. And so you don't develop signs and symptoms many times only when they find the disease. Many times those signs and symptoms are the things that you may be given medications to suppress, but those are the signs and symptoms that something's wrong in the body. So we definitely all understand that, hey, if you don't feel well, you need some crisis care sometimes. But at the end of the day, what your body is trying to tell you things. If you have disrupted sleep, something's wrong. If you have chronic pain, something's wrong. If you have slow metabolism, if you're gaining body fat, something is wrong. And you need to keep asking questions. The challenge is, and it's probably the most frustrating thing for somebody, is they're going to an allopathic physician who they're asking, they've read a blog, they've listened to your podcast, maybe they've listened to my podcast, maybe they've heard Kelly on podcast, and they're saying, I want this approach, and they're going to their allopathic to ask them all of these functional medicine type ideas, thoughts, and testing. And most medical doctors don't know that there's this parallel universe going on called functional medicine, right? They just don't know it exists. I have a patient, he's a cardiovascular surgeon. He said that. Yeah. He said, I didn't even know it existed. I didn't even know what it was. I'm a doctor, I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. I didn't even know it was there. So don't assume that your medical doctor knows what functional medicine is. They know what they were taught. Asking them to do something that they have no training on is like asking your electrician to run your plumbing. It's not going to get done right? Or they're not going to run it at all. You're just going to find you have electricity where your water should be coming in, because they did what they knew what to do. So if you're looking for a disease management, symptom management approach, allopathic crisis care, disease management is what your allopathic physician does. If you're looking to improve your health or live more of a healthy lifestyle or wellness-based lifestyle, there's a whole nother universe. It's called functional medicine or integrative medicine. I don't do surgery. That's not where you come to. If you get in a car accident, don't come to me as a functional medicine practitioner and ask me to give you, do I need B12? No, you're bleeding out. You need surgery. You need some good drugs to stop the pain. That's what allopathic medicine is all about. But I think where the frustration occurs for your listeners, your patients, for our patients, our listeners, is that sometimes they hear this stuff. It really resonates with them, especially if they're frustrated, but they're going back to the same source and asking for a different solution. And really, what do we call that? I think that's the definition of insanity, right? So what you have to understand, if you want a different model of care, you can't ask the same people that have been managing your sickness and failing you to go, oh yeah, let me do something I know nothing about, right? And show that everything I've been doing is inappropriate or wrong. That's what I should do, right? They're not going to do that. They're going to do what they do because that's how they were trained, and they don't understand this other model. So I think for the listeners, it's important to understand that when you see somebody in functional medicine, they're going to take a totally different approach. They're going to run different types of tests. They're going to run different types of labs. They're going to use different lab ranges than your medical doctor. It is a different analysis, evaluation, and treatment mechanism or paradigm than what your allopathic physician is going to be. And so that you don't get frustrated, understand that they're two different things, and there's a place for both of them. But if you want to have natural health care, your allopathic physician, that is not their wheelhouse. If you want drugs and surgery, don't come to the functional medicine practitioner because that's not my wheelhouse, right?
Yep. That is absolutely a great point. I love it. Couldn't have said it better. Dr. Kelly, do you have anything that you want to leave us with in terms of thought processes for my audience to have a little bit of a takeaway?
I think we nailed it, guys. I think we covered it, nailed it. And I think Eric really wrapped it up with a bow and, you know, sending you off with that information. I think that is what we're trying to get across in our book. And, you know, we're excited that, you know, to be on your podcast and to be able to, you know, get this information out.
Well, good deal. I'm so glad that you guys reached out to me. This is wonderful. I can't wait to get a hold of the Thyroid Debacle. Guys, it is on pre-order right now on Amazon. There is the book, Thyroid Debacle. And head over to Amazon, check it out, get on the pre-order list. It's going to be coming out sometime later this summer. And you know, I think it'll be a game changer for a lot of you to understand really the concept of what's truly going on in your body and what's truly going on with your cells, not only just your thyroid. It's not just a thyroid condition here. It is a whole body condition. And gosh, guys, I will have all the notes here. I was taking notes feverishly during this podcast. It'll be at drjkrausend.com or thehealthfixpodcast.com. And I look forward to hearing some comments and want to hear from you guys if you have more questions about the thyroid, because I think Dr. Eric and Dr. Kelly could help us out with more info later on, get them on again and chat about some more topics on the thyroid. Thank you so much, Dr. Eric, and thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on.
Hey, Health Junkies, Dr. Janine Kraus here. I hope you enjoyed my podcast. Guess what? I have a Facebook group. It's called Anti-Aging Health Tips with Dr. Janine Kraus. So if you want a little bit more of the Health Fix podcast, head over to my Facebook group and let's chat. Now, I'm also offering a health transformation and restoration program. It's a one-on-one with me. And it's for folks who are sick and tired of going to doc after doc and health coach after health coach and not seeing the results that they want and deserve. In my program, I'm working with folks with transformation. So this isn't just a light program. This is a big deal. I'm going to change how you think about your health and your life kind of program. And I'm super excited to offer it to folks. And if you are at all interested, we should talk. I'm offering 45 minutes free with me chatting to see if and how I can help you. And you can get all the details over at my website, drjkrausend.com. All right. You've survived another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Kraus. Have a great day, whatever you're doing.
Subscribe, rate, and share info.